Geletka Plus. I've been in the agency and content space for about 20 years now, and excited today, along with Jeff, to share a lot about what we've learned, especially the changes that have happened in the space, which are pretty interesting and relevant, and hopefully help some of the folks on this call grow their business.
Yeah, that sounds good. So I'm Jeff Walker, and John started this agency about 2 years ago and then asked me to join as executive creative director. And we have a lot of passion for brands that have impact, chance to tell a different story, and have just something behind them, something that's cool to offer. And so we're excited, to kind of leverage. I mean, I've been in creative director at some big global agencies working on big brands, but also working on some very small startup engagements and using a lot of the guerrilla and digital tactics that people have to use now. And then also on the other side, on the storytelling side, I've spent some time and still spend some time in Hollywood and working on true entertainment pieces. So altogether, we're going to pull some of that into this and try and figure out, what does high impact storytelling mean for brands at your level? And hopefully, like John said, help you to kind of move towards exploring how to do that yourselves.
Awesome.
Perfect.
So does that sound good? I'm going to share a screen. Actually, let's talk for a minute about kind of define what high impact is for this workshop. Storytelling really can be elaborate. It can involve characters and plot lines and all kinds of very complicated things. But in this sense, we want high impact to be things that you can execute against and things that you can actually do without going through a huge process. So we're going to define it and very narrowly focus on what exactly is high impact and what exactly that means to you and what you can do about it. And I think that's important because storytelling can be as broad as you want to. And in this case, we want it to be really disciplined on what actually delivers some impact. So with that, we're going to go into, let's see. The screen. We'll go like this, and then we'll go and present. How's that?
Looks great.
Okay, thanks. So let's start with kind of back in 1907. And high impact, really, if you're going to judge it, it really begins on what are you trying to impact? That's sort of like the first question that has to be answered. And in 1907, the Florida fruit growers had a lot of oranges. And at that time, oranges were something that people ate, right? It was, okay, that sounds really obvious, but we'll get to the point. They were special. They were sort of like one of those things that people got in their Christmas stockings, right? Or for holidays. So it was a world where all of a sudden they had too many oranges. They were treated as some special commodity and people only ate them. So along came an advertising assignment, really, that said, let's simplify it and come up with a very simple story. And the story was drink an orange. So to us, that sounds like, yeah, we drink orange juice. At that point in time in 1907, people weren't drinking orange juice. They were eating oranges. So they totally changed the story. And in this case, the impact is the problem was too many oranges. They had to find a new way to basically move this product. And so they said, let's change the rules and now people can drink it. Now people had, drank orange juice and absolutely, they didn't invent it. But they started to tell that story that you could do this. And at that point, it was sort of like, wow, that's kind of like a different concept. It makes orange juice accessible. It means, you can basically do other things with it other than just peel it and eat it. And so a simple insight like that is something that even then started to say, well, okay, the impact of the story is that they changed the way that people perceive it, and really very simply. And we'll talk a little bit more about keeping the story very simple and very straight ahead. And if you have any doubt about drinking orange as something that maybe has some legs, if you look at 100 years plus later, Tropicana basically has a visual that says the same thing. And so this kind of messaging does have a chance to endure if you get it right. The other thing I want to measure is there are things that just work, and you can start to say, what have other people done? And is there something that applies to that? Tropicana didn't invent that. I'll tell you a sideline. I have worked on, it's weird, like Minute Maid, Tropicana, different orange juice type beverages. And there was a time when they tried to dump this straw in the orange graphic and failed miserably. The consumers rejected all the new packaging, all the new messaging. Thankfully, I wasn't on that team at that time, but they went back to this, which is just interesting that, you know, the endurance of some of these very simple concepts. So again, to set the ground rules for it. And John, anything else? Just jump in. I'm sorry. That's sort of like the intro.
No, I'm
along for the ride. All right.
I'm
and
for now.
And anybody else jump in as well, because this is my first time presenting this exact case study. So anything that needs to be clarified, there's absolutely room to ask some questions. So if we're going to look at it, like, are there some ground rules here? High impact is all about user insights. It's that simple. Okay. We're going to try and find a problem, and that problem is going to be rooted in something that we learn from our users. We'll talk about who our users are and how to sort of crawl through that. The other piece is it's got to be simple. Think about a headline, right? Again, like I said at the beginning, it's not a whole storyline. It's really the headline that makes people ask more. If you think about drinking orange and somebody has to say, wow, I have to think about that, right? So it's going to be unexpected. It might be shocking. It might even be, as we'll see in some case studies, disruptive or even cause lawsuits, okay? Whatever that is, it should be unexpected, okay? So it can be just reinventing or reimagining. It could also be something that is, you know, something a little bit more and a little edgy. Then the other part of it is it has to be uniquely referable. And those are the three things that we determine in terms of evaluating something to see how we get at it. So let's look now at a brand, and we won't tell you what it is, but they started in 1994, and you guys might be guessing and might already know your food bevy history. And they were in the plant-based category early on, and they tried pretty much to go the conventional route. How do we get it into supermarkets? How do we get it in front of people through pretty much the regular distribution channels? And they failed. So when they wanted to come to the US, they decided to try something different. And so out of all the people out there who really enjoyed plant-based products and were enthusiasts about it, they determined that their easiest, most direct path was coffee lovers. So we started to look at, do they reach coffee lovers through Whole Foods? Do they go to Starbucks? Social media influencers were coming around. And this was not 1994, this was more 2006 at the time. Do they go to supermarkets, end caps, sampling programs? They didn't do any of that, okay? So they had a different vision of how to get it in front of people. And the insight that they had was they saw, quite honestly, that alt milk made bad latte art. And so you got baristas in there who are saying, yeah, we don't really recommend it. We don't think it's as good as milk. And the problem that they were trying to solve was, sure, customers like alt milk. We're starting to see more demand for it. The plant-based thing is taking off huge. However, at the barista level, if the art's crap, we're not recommending it. So they started to move into, hey, baristas, now you can. So the story really was, you thought alt milk was going to be bad for your latte and your latte art and your personal expression. Well, we're going to give you a special blend that's thicker and that works great, and you can do all kinds of crazy designs in there. And that's really it, right? A very simple insight. But they had to go through which consumers they were talking to. Is it going to be the people who buy it on the shelf? Is it going to be a segment of that at Whole Foods? Is it going to be somebody at a higher brand endorsement level? What is it? And they said, no, let's go to the baristas. But not only that, let's not just go to baristas in general. let's go to the baristas at the edgiest level of baristadom, right? And they went in and started to make a production deal with this group called Barista Underground that serves the indie coffee shop world. So they are like the kingpins of the indie coffee world. You might know who they are. John, you know who they are because they were a client for a while and still are, I think, right?
Whoops. Sorry, Jeff. Yeah, they are. I had to move outside for a hot second.
So Barista Underground is basically Brooklyn. They take a chance on certain products, and they took a chance on this product called Oatley, which you probably figured out is the brand we're talking about. And what they were able to do was give some credibility to a very tough crowd, right? Of imagine, hipster coffee shops in Brooklyn trying to take on a new product. But they took it on and they believed it and they believed the story and they understood that it's as simple as if the barista can make a better looking cup of coffee and people can start to say, yeah, that's an exciting way to try an alternative milk, then basically they can start to say, I'm a customer, come into my hipster coffee shop. I see this wall with alternative milks on it. I've never tried it before. I asked the barista, should I try oat? Should I try almond? Should I try one of these other things? And the barista is probably going to recommend the one that they feel most comfortable with and that they can deliver what they do best with, right? Great tasting, great looking, the whole package. So that's really how they sort of got a groundswell in the US and started to make a lot of noise. And it's an interesting model because they didn't go from the high end, they went in the back door, and they didn't even go into like a mainstream coffee shop. They went into something that was truly underground. And they kind of learned as they went along. So I have to tell you too that all of this is also a story, and this becomes part of the folklore around Oatley. So the brand now has this cool underground root story that then starts to translate into how they evolved. People started to adopt them. They grew into what they are now. All of a sudden, they got a trial at Starbucks. That trial went well. They went to 3,500 stores. Then they started to get some celebrities who started to pile on, celebrity endorsements. So all the traditional marketing things or the more advanced guerrilla things started to take off from that point. But the whole thing is they started a groundswell, and it started with that simple insight that latte art with alternative milk wasn't as good. So the other thing that's interesting, and again, this is Oatley, is that they had a lot of bad story elements. I mean, they were majority owned by China private equity. I don't know, some people have a problem with that. They were banned in Sweden, their home country, because the Swedes love their cows, and there was some controversy over them and their advertising making fun of cows. And also they were higher in calories. There was some sugar in there. There was some other things that maybe weren't as natural as people would like. And yet, in spite of all that, and in spite of the plant-based phenomenon and the fact that there were all of a sudden not just other alt milks, but other oat milks, they became the plant-based darling of the universe and IPO'd recently, and people love them. So that's an interesting thing for me too, is that they overcame all of these other obstacles. So I don't know, Jordan, are there any comments, or do we want to keep going?
No, I think let's keep going.
Okay, cool. So let's look at another quick case. And again, let's review that we're looking for examples that have high impact based on some really interesting insights. And then how do they actually tell those insights and solve that problem and get it across, right? How do you get the story across? And then the final ultimate test to measure it is what makes it uniquely referable? How do you actually create that groundswell where you go from Brooklyn Barista all the way to Jay-Z and, huge IPO. Yeah. So in this case, it's fun because a lot of these alternative foods and a lot of this sort of last 10 years has the most fun has been in things that really challenged what we eat and really challenged the way that we eat these things. And one of the huge drivers, of course, has been people paying more attention to the low carb, the paleo, the keto, all the things that you guys know really well as far as being hugely influential in the market and in the types of products that people launch. But once upon a time, just a few years ago, really, there was a need and a kind of an educational need to understand which greens should I eat that fit into these, which things work into this trendy new way of doing things. And the problem was that people really didn't understand. They needed guidance. That's the user insight. Pretty simple, right? They needed to understand which of all the things they should eat, right? Is it Swiss chard? Is it bok choy? Is it carrot greens? Is it, kale, for example? So why did kale rise above, right? They started doing things, again, not that everything begins in New York, but if, there's a chance to tie into New York, it seems to be a way to do it. And this is a very interesting story because this gets into some of the marketing folklore. So you've probably seen Eat More Kale, right? And you've probably seen Kale Yeah. And you've probably seen some of the other great slogans that they had. And what happened was they really made bumper stickers. They made T-shirt slogans. They started to tie into the pop culture a little bit and do this in a guerrilla way. They had two different influencers that sort of get credit for the kale movement. And one of them was somebody who wrote a book called 50 Shades of Kale. And that's where the pop culture comes in. At that time, that was edgy, right? Because it was that edgy book series and movie. And so to kind of shock people, again, the insight of a very simple message that had something unexpected to deliver is that you're thinking about kale, and 50 Shades of Kale is a recipe book, pretty good title, right? And starts to get in, again, as a headline. The story is, well, what does that mean? How do I look at it? It's a little bit edgy, but people started to look at it. At the same time, they started to see these bumper stickers, T-shirt slogans. People were wearing them on hoodies. In New York, they were writing these things on blackboards. They were actually going to trendy restaurants that were a little more vegan friendly or a little more sort of like progressive menus. This farm to table stuff was definitely taking hold. And they wrote it on their chalkboards, right? Like on the menu board, they wrote the slogan. So they kind of took over in very, very strategic places, putting their messages in front of people and started to influence the dialogue, right? Started to get people to talk about it. And what happened that was really interesting then is that they formed this group of people who started to eat it, and it became a badge of honor because they knew what to eat. I mean, it's that simple, right? Of all the greens out there, what am I going to eat that fits into this new lifestyle? What can I do with it, and why would I want to do it? And make it cool. So I've got on one side 50 Shades of Kale and Eat More Kale and some of the slogans. You also had a very interesting sort of like parallel going on from a New York PR firm who basically jumped onto this, started promoting kale, started getting it into the celebrity Rolodexes and took it to the next level for like Ellen and Gwyneth and people like that, putting recipes for kale on their websites and on their TV shows. And so you had this underground movement that all of a sudden was picked up by this PR firm. PR firm was very good at underground. They actually were the PR firm for like Vivienne Westwood, who's like kind of famous punk rock London designer from punk rock days. So there was this kind of meshing of upper echelon guerrilla with absolutely street level guerrilla that started to work really well. The interesting thing about the PR firm is because basically nobody wants to be sold and they don't want a PR firm to be starting a movement. They presented themselves, and this is kind of something to think about ethically, and I'm not sure in the transparency today that would pass, but they claimed that their work was on behalf of the American Kale Association, and that would give it some authenticity and become part of the story in terms of who is sponsoring this. It's good for the farmers. It's helping get this vegetable that used to just be like dressing, the edge of a salad bar, right? That's what kale was used for, into the mainstream and into something that was really healthy, good for you, good for farmers, etc. Sponsored by the American Kale Association. Well, there was no American Kale Association. It was completely invented. And again, this is the folklore of the kale movement. It's the stories that, we hear and that we can kind of pin it down to these two different pieces in New York moving this forward and trying to basically get kale in front of a lot of people to eat. And again, that's the power of kind of the high impact thing, is how do you distill it down into something that's so simple that it starts to take hold? And so we're looking at everything starts with the insights in the consumer. And your consumers obviously are your customers, but they're also the people who care about you. They're obviously your investors, early enthusiasts. But in the case of Oatley, the answers really came from their suppliers, their vendors, and not who you would think would ultimately be buying the product, but kind of the wholesale level. Totally different interpretation, a lot cheaper. And when there was a problem, i.e. the latte art sucked, then they could say, hey, we can help you out with that. And so that's solving the problem for them at that level. And so interviewing all these people and even the customers behind the customers behind the customers is your due diligence. It's a good process to go through, and it's going to take some time and learn. And the goal is really to find the one group that has the most sway, but's not being heard. And I guarantee you'll find that group, and they will be vocal about it, and they'll feel underrepresented. And if you can help them, you've just made best friend for life. And if you can figure out then how to leverage that into some distribution or expand on some other things, then that's how you're starting this little groundswell. You're solving their problem, and they're going to be very, very happy about it.
Jeff,
So
Kate had a quick question. She asked, would you consider these early guerrilla promoters to be influencers?
No, I would say that the influencers usually come later for these brands. So I think that they're being treated like the baristas, for example, definitely are influencers, but really they're more customers. Later on, when you start to get like Ellen or some of these other people, then that's a true influencer campaign. And also, it's a really good question because now there's a whole network of influencers. I mean, you've all looked at TikTok, and you can buy a network of influencers and say, these people are going to make this food with, my ingredient, or they're going to promote my, packaged goods. So there's a little shift now where a lot of these people now become influencers and have their own marketing. But at this point, they were really just people that were early adopters.
Awesome, perfect.
Yeah.
So you're looking at, like, if you were going to execute this today, you would say, who's the person on your team that's the most personable, that people just like talking to, and who really is that extrovert, who enjoys talking to people and pulling stuff out of them? There's definitely somebody on your team that does that. It could be a founder, it could be an intern, it could be anybody in between, just somebody that really enjoys talking, because there's going to be a lot of talking, and you're going to record all this, and you're going to transcribe it, and you're going to look for keywords and things that people are talking to, and you're going to put it through all the different disciplines. And it could take, 3 to 6 months to kind of figure out what that is. Because you want to find, like I said, the group, their problem, ask yourself, can you actually solve that problem? And then start to test it and figure out, can you execute it? So there's a low cost to that, since it's somebody internal doing it kind of as you go. You should be talking, I mean, in my opinion, and John's as well, you should be talking to your customers regularly and learning as you go. But also just the bandwidth on it is manageable. And if you can start to build towards that, it's going to give a lot of insights into what you might do, and a lot of other ideas will come from it. But at the end of that period, you want to pick 3 to 4 audiences that have a distinct problem. And then, like I said, in the case of the Oatley guys, they had to reformulate in order to solve that problem. Not a bad idea, but not everybody would go to that length. So that's interesting too. In the case of like Kale, they didn't necessarily reformulate, but they had to deal with some things there were, I would say, offshoots of their edginess. If you remember the Chick-fil-A slogan where they say, eat more chicken, they sued the 50 Shades of Kale guy because one of his slogans was eat more kale. And I think that's really interesting. It's another way to get some headlines for sure. Another way to actually prove that people are paying attention and showing to it. But what a great badge of honor in the alternative food world, I would think, to be sued by a company like Chick-fil-A. It's an antithesis, right? It's like us versus them now. Now you've got a real kind of like tension, and that story then starts to become much bigger because it's, you know, traditional fast food crap versus eat healthy, you know, organic farm, you know, new diet, etc.
Jeff,
So
here's a question too, kind of on this line of you're going
yeah.
now. How do you filter through the noise, right? Because as founders, we hear stuff all the time from suppliers and customers and probably get, you know, hundreds of points of feedback. How do you kind of filter through to what might make an impact? And then how do you test and learn through that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you're basically using your expectations and literally measuring it one t-shirt at a time. So if you're looking at the noise, you start to see pretty quickly, is this thing taking off? So even at your interview level, what's resonating? And you'll know pretty quickly, like I said, you come up with a couple of different audience options and a couple of different problems. You can tell if something is exciting people. And if it's not, then you have to keep digging. So there is a gut feel to it. But then that's confirmed pretty easily when people start to take it on. And I mean, we talk about it all the time, and it is the T-shirt test, right? When John, we've done it many times where we've said, okay, here's all this work we put into a brand, and here's all of this thinking and strategy, market research, competitive analysis, business plans, go to market, everything. And then it comes down to, does somebody want to wear it? And sometimes we literally put it on a hat and give it to people and see if people wear it. I know that doesn't sound like the data-driven marketing that we're in love with at the moment, but it does come down to, are people actually feeling it? Are they wearing it? And who are they? Are they the people that we want to wear it? So that's an easy way to filter through the noise by saying, you know, is it at the most basic level doing it? Because if you go out big, you're already part of the noise. If you can build through it with something you believe in and that builds from that base, then you can start to filter it better and understand it. So I hope that answers the question, but that's another reason to start. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I just, you know, one of my favorite things about working with you all the time is like I get to thinking about these problems in a new way each time. So, you know, as you were talking, and even in this filter through the noise question, really the formula that we do all the time, right? Identifying the user insights, boiling it down to a few unexpected words based on some gut, and really making it easy to be referable helps filter through the noise in a lot of ways, right? And the hat test is a great example of that. But really what I got to thinking of is what this formula does is it makes what story we're telling portable. And if a story is portable, meaning it's easy to go from, like, if you're in social, it's an influencer, it's easy to tell from person to person to person. If it's a brand, there's an emotional connection, and I want to tell that story from person to person. If it's a performance marketing, there is a clear incentive to tell that story. Whatever your mix of marketing and your goals are at the time, right? That level of portability from a high impact story is immensely valuable. And it gives you the ability then to learn really fast. You know, I hate to say this, but we don't know in a lot of cases, but we've got some good ideas. And, you know, we're a lot of times in the business of trying to get to those to validate those ideas as fast as possible. So we invest heavily in a strong story that's aligned to the brand, aligned to the customers, that is portable and easy to tell. And then we get it into the markets fast where we think it is, whether that's a hat, a t-shirt, a sticker, a multi-tier distribution network, et cetera, if you will. So that's really the power and what I just love about this and what it got me thinking about.
Awesome. That's great insight, John.
Thanks. Cool. Sorry, didn't mean to derail that too much.
No,
Just back here.
that's what we want to do is kind of look at some of the challenges. The other part is that there's always new opportunities. Other brands have gone in now and tried that underground barista route. And in fact, when we were working with them and interviewing their founders, they were talking about other brands that were approaching them and kind of laughing and calling themselves, hey, we're the kingmakers. Hey, you know, like,
Yeah,
you come to us and we'll make sure you get to the underground baristas. You know, it's like, you know, they're creating their own little story that built upon the story of Oatley, basically, right? They were like, yeah, we're the guys who identified Oatley, you know?
So Jeff, Taylor has a clarifying question. He asks, so the storytelling really boiled down to a slogan or a catchphrase?
So that's the headline. So the story then, if you unpack it, starts to become much richer and has the characters and the vibe and all of it to it. But the high impact part of it needs to be boiled down so it can be repeatable. You know, people can say, oh yeah, that's what they do. Because your brand can do lots and lots of things, but what's the one thing that we want to do that has the most impact? That's the discipline, and that's the hardest thing in the world to do. I'll tell you, this is a little bit like pitching a story in Hollywood. You get basically a log line, right? You have to say, what was the world like? What happened to change it? And what was the outcome? That's it. So you have to boil down a 2-hour movie into 3 lines. And this is the same discipline here. You have to boil down all the cool stuff that your product does, all the great things that your founders represent, all the stuff that you've looked at and analyzed and say, what is that one thing that you can put in a headline? So yes, it comes down to a slogan, a bumper sticker, but when you unpack it, it's everything else that you basically can represent.
Do you find that often comes where the headline comes first and you test that out and then you build the story around it, or do you build the story and then find the headline to really accentuate it?
So that's a great way to look at it, because sometimes it just shows up. Not usually, but sometimes there's a headline and you pull it out of the magic hat, as John and I call it, and there it is. A lot of times that comes from having done all your homework already. I mean, as founders, you guys are all thinking about this constantly. Your brain's working while you're asleep, and you're starting to say, well, what is my story? What is my headline? And it might just show up, because that's part of the magic of founding a company, is nobody sees it like you do. In that case, then you would work from there and start to test it and see how it works with the audience, still interview your customers, try it out. If you love it right away, put it on a hat and wear it. Somebody might say, I love that, right? So you can jump in like that. A lot of times, especially because you have other stakeholders and you have process and you have things that, you know, limits on time and what you can do. The discipline is to actually go through and mine your sort of like different layers and networks and people to start to find out what is that need that they need fulfilled, and you start to work from there. But
yeah,
inside out or outside in? What do you think, John?
Well, I was going to say I agree 100%. It's both, and I always liken it to music, right? So I'm no great musician, but I know enough to be dangerous, right? And early human music was rooted in call and response. So call and response, and it was, you know, as humans, it was early a mating call, then it became ritual, then it became entertainment, what it is today. But call and response is really what I think a lot of what we're talking about here. And the catchphrase or headline is the call, and the response is the story. And as more and more people heed that call and that response, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it grows, and those new stories stem out from it, and those new perspectives perspectives, and the song, if you will, in this case, a brand gets bigger and that story keeps reverberating. What we're focused on, right, and talking a lot about is kind of nailing that call, right? And then the response is either amplified by us as marketers or by the community or by some mechanism together, right? Almost as if as brand owners, we play the role of conductor. But I really am often attached to this music theory when it comes to marketing. But there's no right place to start. It's just about understanding both sides and understanding what's going on. And when we say understand your customers, what response do we want and what call are we going to give? When we say it goes back and forth, I think.
Yeah, and I remember, I see this all the time with founders telling like really complicated stories as they pitch. And, they're like, okay, so it started 10 years ago. And, I was walking over here. It's like, okay, you already lost them, right? You need to have that something that boils down your entire kind of story or product pitch or brand pitch into something that's like really quick and catchy that keeps someone's attention. So they want to learn more versus having to tell like a 10-minute story to get to the point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other part is that investors, especially, and partners, they want to know what sets you apart. There's lots of people going after the same, categories or the same types of things. And part of it is the story that you're going to tell, and part of it is the brand that you're building. And part of it is making it gettable so that people say, oh, that's how you're different. I get it. You're going after this market strategy with this message. That sounds like it might work. And that's why you're different than the 10 other oat milks. Is like that actually makes sense. It's like you're gonna do something here. So it gives you also a chance to expand your story and unpack it for investors in terms of not only are we a cool product with all these great benefits, but we're smart. And investors like smart because they're betting on management. They want you to think out of the box and come up with something that's a market opportunity that nobody else saw. So if this story unpacks into something that attaches to a way in a go-to-market that has more impact and that somebody can buy into, they might just say, okay, we're going to watch, come back, show me how many hats people are wearing. We'll put some money in. And that's a big part of this too. Also for acquisition's sake, I mean, you guys all know it as well as we do. People buy brands. I mean, there's lots of different companies, lots of things that do similar things. But when somebody actually goes to acquire it for a larger company, a larger holding company, they're also buying that audience, they're buying that story, and they're buying how that company got to where they are. And that's a huge value as well. Doesn't come for a while, but that's where you start.
Awesome, that's great. What next do you have?
All right, what's next on the show here?
At this point, I was interested in questions and just hearing how we could help or how we could execute for you. I think that's the questions are great. So
awesome. No, so I definitely appreciate that and those points on like what makes something really high impact. So at this point, let's open it up to our founders and audience here. If anyone has any questions you want to ask about your brand story or how to get something across or any ideas, you can feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourself and hop on video, and you can ask that to Jeff and John directly.
I have a question. It's Karen Kaplan at Damon Jackson. Good to see you guys. One question I have that we've been dealing with a lot lately is targeting messaging to sort of different audiences, even for the same brand. So there may be internal, and then there may be variations of external, B2B, B2C, all for the same brand. How do you manage that?
Well, we've got a couple of methodologies that we like to use, right? So there is, we try to get down to what is the brand platform, right? That's usually mission, vision, values, personality, position, right? And then there's audiences that brand needs to talk to, internal, external. If they're in a more complex business like a B2B, there can be a complete a very complex customer that has 2 or 3 different tiers of customers, people within them, ranging from influencers to decision makers to different levels of influencers. Executives are going to have a different influence than somebody on the IT team. However, they all matter, right? So there's that core brand message. But what we can do is we like to do a little bit of research around the consumer journey of each of these people. So in a B2B space, if you roll out a B2B business simply, right? There's influencers and decision makers, and then there's their customers that we're helping, right? And whatever subtleties are in that business, we try to understand them and say, what's their journey like? If they're purchasing a large piece of SaaS software, or they are buying thousands and thousands of pieces of toilet paper for their businesses, for their 900 store franchise, right? That matters, and there's a lot of decision makers in that process. So all of those different people have a journey, right? And that core brand message can be broken down, and almost to go back to the music analogy, you can take different pieces of that brand journey, go up at an influencer early on, and what does that look like in the real world? Influencers want to know how much cost savings this will be. Decision makers may want to know cost, time, implications to SG&A, and more in a B2B piece. Other influencers may want to know, how this integrates with my current system, and on and on. So we try to map out that journey, right? And we map out that journey in different ways, through stakeholder interviews, through ethnographic research, through diary-based research, through information that our client knows and has. You map out that journey, and you start to align different messages to each point. And all of a sudden, I've got a go-to-market strategy that I can choose from. I can do an influencer program that talks to the benefits of implementation on my SaaS program, and talk to the core brand message, and to the decision makers, I can talk to the cost savings and roll back to my emotional connection. So we love is a next level of weaponizing. Once I've got my call down, weaponize it across the journey, and then test along the way, right? A lot of times, if we get that core part right, it's really easy and it tests a lot better. And if we don't, we learn really, really quick, and we kill those failing messages and those failing. And when we say messages, right? When I say messages, it's usually, that can be a video, that can be a search, that can be a talk, that can be a website, that can be big or small, and not just your traditional line.
And John, kind of building on that question with Karen too, I see a lot of food brands have multiple audiences for their products, right? So it might be like an athlete on one side, but it's also keto, and that's a slightly different audience. And maybe they have more of a low sugar message, which is similar but different. And so do you recommend that brands kind of take one approach, or create kind of highly targeted stories to each of those audiences as they're kind of building to figure out who their core customers are?
Yeah. I mean, brands are complex, right? And there's always going to be an edge case that beats this. But I do recommend that a brand stick to its core and tune its message accordingly, right? We don't want, I'm gonna wing it, right? We'll try to get a big brand here. We don't want Nike talking a different way to its suppliers than it does to its customers, right? There's a cost message that its suppliers care about. There's a distribution message that they care about, or let's say in the case of retail, right? That matters. But there's still an emotional connection that those audiences need to understand that needs to go with that message. So it's a little bit of an additive piece. But the problem that folks do, and that we've seen a lot in B2B, is they are just going to that retailer supplier with the cost and value message, and they're losing that connection to why Nike has this amazing emotional connection with athletes and customers. They're not getting that to their suppliers. And so that again rolls back to that journey, right? And understanding what those customers need at what point in time. And it also goes back to that little piece of not losing the brand connection to it, whatever that brand. Brand's a dangerous word, like it's a big B. A lot of people understand it and interpret it differently. But if you say, that essence or that mission or that vision, whatever that core piece is, I would say you can't lose that in any conversation along the journey. And that's the thing that a lot of people miss.
I'm going to just throw one thing in. It becomes a big hairball very quickly because you do have lots of audiences, lots of stakeholders. I would say on average, everybody has 15 audiences. That includes your internal audiences, your investors, your vendors, your customers, et cetera, right? Your journalists, your, other agency folks. I mean, if you break it down, it's pretty easy to get to 15 or more targets in a way, all of whom can help in some way. And one way that I like to look at it is you have something that you're going to talk about now. Maybe it's a release, maybe it's something else, whatever it is. You have some kind of an event coming up, whatever. That's not applicable to all 15 of those people in your target audience, but it is applicable to probably 3 to 5 of them. And those 3 to 5 are probably unified around something. Let's just say, I don't know why I'm thinking about investors, but let's just say they want to know something about the impact of this. Well, like John said, the core message is always going to be there, and you're going to reinforce that every time. And no matter how many times people have heard it, they need to hear it again. But then you're going to say, and this news impacts this audience with this message. So you start to say, okay, it's not as hard that way. You've got your base, and you know that the investors are going to be interested in these things. So you're going to connect that core premise to this news and make sense of it. Then next quarter, you've got some other news, and you probably have a different audience group. Maybe you're going after some partners. They have a whole different need, but that core message stays the same. So how is this appeal to partners combined with your core meaningful to that audience? Same thing with, like Jordan said, a low sugar story, a keto story, different consumer groups. Again, if you're thinking about it, back to the Oatley story, somebody probably came along and said, you guys are owned by a 53% Chinese equity firm, private equity. How do we overcome that, right? Well, here's part of how that story then plays to something that somebody might object to.
Yep. Keep people's attention over here. Do not research totally.
Yeah, there's always a little of this,
Make a great product and keep your eye over here.
Yep.
Awesome. Other questions that our founders have on storytelling, or particularly how to make your brand kind of stand out?
No questions. Everybody's got this. I love it.
What have you seen be effective mediums for storytelling in the digital age, and how do you kind of roll those out? Do you recommend kind of founders as front and center, right? Because like most of the brands on here between 200K, 5 million in revenues, so still very much founder led. How much do you recommend like the founder being out front and center versus some other type of storytelling?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think we'll probably have different answers, but mine is it depends, right? There's a lot of different types and styles of founders and a lot of different reasons people found companies, right? The companies that I think are stronger, I would look at and go, hey, this is an opportunity for the founder should step out, is if they built this company really to solve a big problem, right? There's a lot of founders. We all found companies for different reasons. Some of us found companies to change the world. Some of us found companies with problems. Some of us have companies because it helps, because we had a kid that couldn't eat this way, so we brought to market because there are so many other people. And some of us found it just to make money. I want to make money, do an exit, and all those are great reasons to found a company. But usually in the cases where there's I think a stronger story, and a stronger story that benefits people, right? That's when I like to bring the founder forward and really help them articulate their story and how it complements to the brand. And then the other reason, right, like if there's the stronger the tie the founder has to the product and brand, meaning how close are their stories, the more likely I would be to recommend a founder step forward, even if they don't want to, because some founders are like me, they're introverts. They kind of want to, stay behind the scenes and put lots of smarter people in front of them. And some founders, you got to put, they're such charismatic people, you just want to hold them out in the light as long as you can. I don't know. The answer is but the trends that I see are really strong close to the brand, doing something that's bigger than themselves, having a good why. Those are usually great indicators to step forward. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I think you got to pick a horse, right? So if it's the founder, it's the founder. If it's the category and you're participating in something that's really hot, then you have to figure out how to stand out within a big trend. And if it's someplace in the middle, then you have to look at, are you an ingredient or a part of something, or, you know, some other way to fit in a way that makes sense, again, based on who you're trying to make sense to. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think it could be any of those. It could be a combination. I also think there's different people in your group probably that can tell the story. So I'm more, there's many people with many voices, and I think that resonates very well in the market. There's a sense that people want to, you know, be part of a larger thing, and they want to understand that this is a company that does include people and has other voices that matter. So that's my personal opinion. It is like a progressive company with a progressive attitude, more than just transparency. So giving other people voices, I think, is a way to stand out, and you know, being authentic about it, I think, is a cool way to stand out. I also think there's a little backlash against, not necessarily, you know, okay, big CEOs, okay, backlash, right? Okay, you guys should not be making as much money as you're making. So we all get that, and that's happened. But there's also kind of like the Silicon Valley founder backlash, you know, a little bit about, you know, arrogance and knowing the world. I think we're in a time now where there's an opportunity to stand out by being a little bit humble and being a little bit more authentic and inclusive. So I think that's, to me, a good CEO and a good leader does that anyway.
I love that. Great points. Awesome. So we're coming up on the end of our time here. And John and Jeff, I just want to give you a little bit of time to talk about some of the ways that you help brands kind of go through this process of navigating, you know, their own storytelling. I love that you gave kind of a look inside your process of, you know, problem user insights, fewer words, but unexpected and uniquely referable as the process of kind of creating that high impact brand. But we'd love to hear a little bit more just about your process of what you guys walk through, or anything that's different, or how you help.
Well, I think it's definitely, we try to boil it down, and thanks for rephrasing that, because that is what it comes down to, and that's the way you evaluate it. The process to go through it, it's kind of funny because over the years, you know, I've worked with different people who do it in different ways, including like ethnographers and archaeologists and people who try and get into this sort of spirit. One trick is really to not only listen and take notes and understand what people are saying, but the words that they're actually using to express it are something that most people overlook. And I'm a writer, so that's where I come from, and I look at the words, but there's also the images and the symbols and the other things that are nonverbal that people use to express concepts that they're having a hard time expressing. That, to me, is where the magic is you try and unpack that. And we help people unpack it. You're so close to your brands, you're so close to what it is you're trying to do. And also, as founders of multiple companies, John and I both understand that you're wearing all the hats. And so having a third party take that away and start to say, here's how you start to look at each one of these groups, these words, these images, how they're talking about it. This is something else to think about. Then it gives you a little airspace, and then and somebody on your team can do this too, right? Again, that's why I was recommending somebody on your team who's really an extrovert goes out and does this, collects it, comes back, and then the founder can look at it with new eyes. So that's part of working it internally.
Perfect. Anything else to add, John?
No, I think that I share perspective.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, John, thanks so much for joining us today and for presenting this. I think it's an incredibly valuable way of looking at it. And, you know, to resonate on Taylor's kind of question, it's, you know, having something that's short and catchy as a tagline, but the substance and depth behind it as well, depending on which one comes first, is kind of up to your process. But by really standing out and creating something that's making an impact, then you go beyond just like the lackluster competitor that's in the space, or the product that doesn't get picked up, to something that's getting picked up and talked about off the shelf, and it's really standing out. So with that, have a great rest of your Friday. Have a great weekend coming up. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to connect you with John and Jeff as well. And I'll also be sending out that recording. So thanks so much, everyone.
Jordan, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Yep. Thanks for showing up.